Not only am I going to give you players that I think you should be sending offers out for this week, but also I'm going to be looking at real trades that were made today and yesterday involving these players, grading them, and possibly suggesting them for your team. But first, definitely want to recap who we talked about last week. Last week, we had the entire Cincinnati Bengals offense as a buy low candidate, including Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Zach Moss. Now, if you didn't buy low on Burrow and Chase last week, you probably missed the boat. It's not going to happen again this week. Those discounts are gone. You can still potentially get T. Higgins and Zach Moss discounted, which will still be something that I'm very interested in. I have T. Higgins over there on flockfantasy.com, ranked as a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 rest of season. And I have Zach Moss ranked as a low-end RB2, feeling very comfortable about his job currently as the main guy in this good offense. Now, I also had Garrett Wilson as a buy low candidate. Sadly, after another down performance on Thursday night, I did have to move Garrett Wilson down my rest of season rankings over on the site. Now I have Garrett Wilson around wide receiver 14 rest of season. I mean, if you can buy him as a low-end wide receiver 2, I definitely would. I would definitely buy low on Brandon Ayuk still if you could get him as a low-end wide receiver 2. Xavier Worthy as that buy low candidate. We actually just saw Sal and one of the developers of flockfantasy.com get a Xavier Worthy trade going. You can see it on the screen here. And then I would have Keon Coleman as a buy low candidate last week. And I stand by Keon Coleman as a buy low candidate yet again this week. Gets disciplined for showing up late. Doesn't get to play the first quarter, but still comes out and gives you the receiving touchdown in what should be one of the league's best offenses going into the future. But hopefully that was adequate enough to recap everything that happened a week ago. And let's look at the players that I'm now sending offers out for. Starting off with somebody that I did not like in drafts this year. So I know maybe this seems a little bit awkward, but Tank Dell. Yes, I think it has gotten to the point where you can buy low on Tank Dell, where if you're going to go through and look at what he has done so far this season, 0 touchdowns. 3 receptions, 1 reception, then 5 receptions, 40 receiving yards, negative 3 receiving yards, 62 receiving yards. If you have started Tank Dell every single week, he has let you down. He has been a drag on your performance, and he has most likely cost you weeks. However, if we are going to project this out going into the future, I still expect that this Houston Texans offense is one of the better passing offenses in the NFL. And honestly, I'm very confident when saying that. And if we look at what CJ Stroud has done through the first 3 weeks, the main issue that you've had here in Houston is that CJ Stroud just hasn't been a high volume passer. With Stroud, you only have 4 passing touchdowns through the first 3 games. With CJ Stroud, he has yet to crack 300 passing yards this season. You're looking at week 1 with 234, week 2 with 216. Obviously, the absolute collapse that you had against the Vikings this week with only 215 yards passing. So with Dell, you've had the issue that now people are waking up to the fact that, yeah, he's only the wide receiver 3 here in Houston. He is still behind Diggs. He is still behind Nico Collins. That's exactly how I had it ranked coming into the season. That's why I wasn't taking Tank Dell when in underdog drafts. I mean, he was going neck and neck with Stephon Diggs. But now going into the future, I think people are more reasonable with his expected role here in Houston, where he's the 3rd target in this offense. And what I would personally project is I would project that Stephon Diggs, while yes, is still the receiver ahead of Dell, he is going to come back down to earth just slightly, and the overall passing volume in this offense is going to come up. If you go over to flockfantasy.com, I do have Tank Dell still ranked as somebody that you should consider in the flex spot pretty much any given week. And also, if we consider the fact that we are about to come up onto the buys, you probably are going to be able to see Tank Dell as that startable option. The receivers that I personally have Tank Dell around, and of course, you can view all my rankings all the time over there on flockfantasy.com. I literally update them every single day. But I have Tank Dell currently ranked at about wide receiver 31, right behind players like Zay Flowers, Deontay Johnson, and right ahead of guys like Xavier Worthy and Jaxon Smith-Njigba, a player that we'll talk about a little bit later on today. And if we actually use the trade finder tool over there on flockfantasy.com, this is free on the site, by the way. Literally, whenever you want, go to flockfantasy.com, look at the trade calculator, look at the trade finder, both completely free tools that we've built out. And with that trade finder, you can see real trades that have been made in real leagues. You can actually put in your exact league settings as well. So you can see trades that were made with your exact league settings in real leagues. But some trades that I'm seeing go down, Rico Dowdle was traded for Tank Dell. Give me Tank Dell. Somebody traded Mike Evans and Braylon Allen for Josh Jacobs, Tank Dell. Now, I'll talk about Jacobs later in this video. He will be a buy low candidate for us, but I would rather have the Jacobs and Dell side there. Somebody traded Devin Singletary, Quentin Johnston for Tank Dell. Give me Tank Dell. Somebody traded Deontay Johnson for Mark Andrews and Tank Dell. Give me Tank Dell. Like I said, I don't want to oversell this. I don't want to act like Tank Dell is some locked and loaded top 20 wide receiver rest of season. He's not, but the role has been exactly what we were expecting coming into the year. I think the passing volume is going to go up, and I still view him as that wide receiver 3 as we did coming into the season. Now, going over to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Jayden was a receiver that I actually didn't love coming into drafts this year. I was looking at this situation going, okay, well, I think Tyler Lockett's going to have a decent role here. I don't know how much passing volume there's going to be going around. Obviously, DK Metcalf is the number one guy, and Jayden had a very disappointing rookie season. But what all the Jayden proponents were saying, they're saying it's all Shane Waldron's fault. The offensive coordinator here in 2023 was horrendous. We didn't see nearly enough 3 wide receiver sets. He's now gone to Chicago. We can see what he's doing over there. And actually, Jayden's going to be playing significantly more this season. He has the talent, which we saw at Ohio State, and this will lead him to actually being a fine option in fantasy. And honestly, I think they were right. Because a couple different things here. One, if you look at this chart from PFF, you will see that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is slowly but surely climbing up his snap participation rate, where we're actually seeing him pretty much set a new career high every single week in the snaps that he is playing here for the Seattle Seahawks. We've had the glimpse of the top end ceiling after week 2 when he comes out and he has 16 targets, he has 12 receptions and the 117 receiving yards. Now, obviously, he's been up and down, up and down, up and down. What I'm imagining happened here is I'm imagining whoever drafted Jaxon Smith-Njigba started in week 1, got 19 receiving yards, benched him week 2, blew up on the bench, started him week 3, and then Jayden yet again did nothing. The owner has to be pissed, but honestly, I think that the underlying volume numbers are just fine. I have Jayden ranked at wide receiver 33 rest of season. And honestly, I think that you can go out there and buy him as that low-end wide receiver 3. Because if I go over to flockfantasy.com and use the trade calculator that we have, here we're looking at Jaxon Smith-Njigba versus Jerome Ford. We're looking at Jaxon Smith-Njigba versus Zach Charbonnet. We're looking at Jayden and Bijan Robinson versus CeeDee Lamb. So there, Lamb is just being traded straight up for Bijan. Jayden's a throw in. Somebody traded Goddard for Jayden. Javonte and Shaheed for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And I'm honestly fine at all those prices, because one other thing we have to consider, and I actually hope Lockett crushes, I have a lot of them in underdog drafts, is if you are looking at what you have with the profile of Tyler Lockett versus the profile of Jayden, between these two players, we would expect that the ascending option in year 2 is going to expand his role as the season goes on, and the older veteran is actually going to see his role diminish as the year goes on. Now, our next player in Jayden Reed is actually my favorite underdog pick of the week at wide receiver to go higher than 46.5 receiving yards in a game that we expect Jordan Love will be good to go in. And of course, if you wanted to go tail me on the higher 46.5 yards, you can find the link to Underdog in the description. You can find the link in the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you are going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, promo code FLOCK will hook you up with a free Patrick Mahomes pick'em, more than less than half a total yard going into that Sunday night game, and a free Dak Prescott pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Thursday night game. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a free team review in one of the live streams that we are hosting every single night through flockfantasy.com. But let's dive into Jayden Reed here. Now, Jayden Reed was a receiver that was a must bench name for us over the past 2 weeks. Over the past 2 weeks, you had Malik Willis in. This was going to be a rush first offense. And you actually see the personnel packages change here a bit, where even the snap rate for Jayden Reed came down, where you actually saw Jayden Reed only play 56 and 57% of snaps. You saw Jayden Reed only have 8 total targets over the past 2 weeks. And with that, really the passing volume wasn't there with Malik Willis for Jayden Reed to find success. He had 9 receiving yards, then 50 receiving yards. But what's actually really encouraging is looking at the targets that Jayden Reed had in comparison to some of these other Green Bay Packers receivers. Because obviously, if we're looking at Romeo Doubs, we're looking at Dontavian Wicks, we're looking at Christian Watson, coming into the season, there was a lot of conversation, there was a lot of discussion about who the true wide receiver 1 was. But if we're looking at the target volume that you've had through the first 3 weeks here, I mean, with Jayden Reed, he's currently sitting at 14 targets. If you're looking at Romeo Doubs, he's at 12 total targets. If we're looking at Christian Watson's only had 7 total targets, and Dontavian Wicks is only sitting at a total of 9 targets. So Jayden Reed actually does look like he is establishing himself as the wide receiver 1. You throw in the fact that Jayden Reed himself is actually going to run the ball some as well, which is just really funny to think about, that you get that additional equity coming in. And the expectation for this Green Bay Packers offense should be dramatically better with Jordan Love under center as opposed to what it was with Malik Willis. Even in a tough matchup this week going up against the Minnesota Vikings, we are seeing sportsbooks already give an implied team total of 23.5 points for the Green Bay Packers here, much higher than they did previously, even in better matchups with Malik Willis under center. So I think you're about to see this offense change in a big time way. I actually wouldn't fault you if you wanted to go and put out some feelers for Christian Watson as well. I mean, with Watson, I definitely treat him a little bit more as a throw-in. If you're looking at the deals that we have seen go down between these two players, somebody traded Tony Pollard and Cole Kmet for Jayden Reed, Alexander Mattison. Somebody traded Chuba Hubbard for Jayden Reed. I actually really like that with Brooks coming back in. We'll talk about Brooks in a second. Someone traded Charbonnet for Jayden Reed. I like that with Walker coming back in. Somebody traded Adam Thielen for Christian Watson. I think that's a very reasonable price to buy Christian Watson at. And honestly, I'm not going to be overvaluing Watson from there. I really want you to be treating him as a throw-in if you're going to be adding him to a deal. Now, let's go over to a player that, thank God, I didn't draft in the Flock League, but I have him in a ridiculous amount of underdog drafts. And full transparency, I have a lot of money if he does well. Jordan Addison. Now, if we're looking at Jordan Addison, I personally have him ranked around wide receiver 46 in my rest of season ranks. This is directly ahead of guys like Christian Watson, Jawan Jennings, Rashid Shaheed, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Kirk. And with Addison, what I'm very encouraged to see is, while yes, he hasn't been in this offense over the past few weeks, the offense hasn't collapsed. Sam Darnold's looked very good. Now, obviously, a lot of this has to do with the defense is just putting them in phenomenal environments, especially with just position on the football field. But still, if Darnold is able to come out here and just give you reasonable production at the quarterback position, and we have Jordan Addison coming back in, I want to remind you who Jordan Addison was in 2023. Jordan Addison was a receiver that came out and had 108 targets, 911 receiving yards, 70 receptions, and 10 receiving touchdowns as a rookie in a season where you had some really bad quarterback play. Yeah, Cousins was in here for a little bit, but it wasn't like it was the vast majority of games. And if you're looking at this going into the future, Jalen Nailor has actually stepped in, and Jalen Nailor himself has been a viable option in the case of the Jordan Addison absence. Now, going into the future, do I expect that Jalen Nailor, a kind of random, quote-unquote, breakout receiver at 25 years old, continues to actually be a viable piece here in Minnesota? Or do I expect that the former Biletnikoff winner, a.k.a. Mr. 10 touchdowns in his rookie season, at 21 years old, first-round NFL draft pick, coming off the ankle injury, is he going to be the guy? He is most likely going to be the guy. I definitely think that he is an interesting pickup if you're playing in like a 12-team league with multiple flex spots. Some recent trades involving Jordan Addison. We can see this, like I said, with the trade finder on flockfantasy.com. Zamir White for Jordan Addison. Somebody traded Derrick Henry and Brock Purdy for Jahmyr Gibbs, Jordan Addison. No-brainer. Somebody traded Pittman for Dobbins and Jordan Addison. I really like that as well. Now, let's revisit what we have with the Green Bay Packers offense, and let's go ahead and let's look at Josh Jacobs. Now, yes, this past week, Emmanuel Wilson came out and he had the vast majority of the points in this backfield. Josh Jacobs, extremely disappointing, had a total of about 6 fantasy points for you at the end of the day, where Emmanuel Wilson, had just the receiving touchdown, 35 receiving yards. But honestly, if you're looking at the underlying volume, it's not like Emmanuel Wilson played a ton of snaps. It's not like Emmanuel Wilson saw a ridiculous amount of targets. Emmanuel Wilson had 2 targets in this backfield. And now Emmanuel Wilson himself's interesting, similar to what you had with Jordan Mason once Elijah Mitchell went on the IR, because there is no Marshawn Lloyd, because there is no A.J. Dillon, and this running back room's thinned out, so Emmanuel Wilson is the clear guy behind Jacobs at this point. But Josh Jacobs is still the feature down back here. Josh Jacobs is a running back that has had over 20 carries per game through the first 3 weeks. Now, yes, this hasn't been a phenomenal offense. Yes, the receiving workload hasn't really been there, but it's been a low volume passing attack. And as we get more pass attempts with Jordan Love under center, I would actually expect more targets to be going to Josh Jacobs as well. I think you should have more points scored in Green Bay, as we previously discussed. The workload's still there. I think it's a positive for Jacobs that Marshawn Lloyd goes on the IR, because honestly, who am I more worried about rest of season? Am I more worried about Emmanuel Wilson, or would I have been more worried about Marshawn Lloyd? For sure, Marshawn Lloyd. Going over to the site and looking at the trade finder, some of these Josh Jacobs trades, somebody traded Khalil Shakir and Jake Ferguson, got Josh Jacobs, easily Jacobs. Somebody traded DJ Moore for Josh Jacobs. They can go Jacobs there. Somebody traded Rachaad White for Josh Jacobs. I'd well rather have Josh Jacobs over Rachaad White. Looking at my running back rankings rest of season, I currently have Josh Jacobs at RB12, and I have Rachaad White down there at RB23. And then lastly, somebody traded Devin Singletary and Rashid Shaheed for Jacobs, which I absolutely love. Now, this is going to be a little painful to talk about this one. So we already talked about the trade that we saw earlier where Sal went out there and traded away Xavier Worthy. Well, here we actually saw Danny, one of the guys over at FSE, swindle himself into Jonathan Brooks. We actually see Rico Dowdle, Adam Thielen traded for Jonathan Brooks in the Flock League. Yeah, some fab dollars are thrown on, but who freaking cares? This was effectively a Rico Dowdle for Jonathan Brooks trade. Now, in fairness, the developer who did trade with Danny here was 0-3, really needed some points, couldn't afford to wait for Jonathan Brooks. And Danny, on the other hand, is 3-0, absolutely monstrous squad, and obviously can afford to wait on the Jonathan Brooks value. And that's where I'd recommend that you trade for Jonathan Brooks. On a team where you're currently 3-0, on a team where you are 2-1. And we can be thinking about the long term here, because as it stands now, Jonathan Brooks is significantly more appealing based off the fact that there is some life to this Carolina Panthers offense. Now that we are seeing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that you don't have to deal with Bryce Young forever, and actually it's not just a 1 week instance. Now sportsbooks are actually giving the Panthers a 21.5 point implied team total this next week. So the Panthers should be a slightly below average offense instead of the worst offense in the NFL. This is the time to get Brooks before you actually have conversations about him coming off the IR. Some of the trades that we've seen over there on flockfantasy.com include Ladd McConkey, Chase Brown for Jonathan Brooks, Isaiah Pacheco for Brooks. I'd way rather have Brooks. I think he's going to be coming back earlier. Chuba Hubbard for Jonathan Brooks. I think Brooks is a much more talented running back than Hubbard. Give me Brooks long term. And then somebody traded Bucky Irving for Jonathan Brooks as well. I think that's a very interesting spot to just sell the rookie that has flashed a bit for the rookie that was a much, much better prospect coming out of school. And then two other injured players that I'll throw on the very end here. David Njoku, I wouldn't mind putting out some feelers with. Seems like David Njoku may be coming back soon. And then we talked about buying low on, these injured guys last week, right? We talked about buying low on Brooks. We talked about buying low on TJ Hawkinson. And I do stand by. I think Hawkinson is a very interesting buy low candidate, especially as the Vikings move to 3-0 and they have some incentive to actually get TJ Hawkinson back into this offense and keep this gravy train rolling, where Hawkinson, I do believe, has the shot to be one of the very few productive tight ends in fantasy this season. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, I definitely want you to be using the trade calculator and the trade finder over there on flockfantasy.com. That way we can make sure that we are making our teams better. That's why we made those tools free for you over there on the site. And also, if you wanted to tail me on my Jayden Reed higher than 46.5 receiving yards pick on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog, you are going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. You'll be getting a free Patrick Mahomes pick, more than less than half a total yard for this Sunday night. And you're going to be getting an additional Dak Prescott free pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Thursday night game, and a free team review over there on flockfantasy.com. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as you used on Underdog. That way I'm able to go through and to credit you with that free team review voucher. But I think that's all I have for you. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope I get to check out your team in the live stream tonight.